What you are about to hear will change how you understand global finance forever. This is Alexander Leo Smith. You are watching Light Intel. Before we begin, if you value independent geopolitical analysis, hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to understand what is really happening behind the headlines, and leave a comment below with your thoughts, because what I am about to reveal affects every single person watching. 3 weeks ago, I was in Brussels, a closed-door meeting with European finance officials. The topic was Russia sanctions. One senior official leaned forward and said something I will never forget. We thought freezing their assets would bring them to their knees. Instead, we have created a monster we cannot control. Those words have haunted me ever since, because what Europe did with Russian assets has triggered a chain reaction, a reaction that will reshape the entire global financial system. Let me tell you what they are not reporting and why this $15 billion seizure might be one of the greatest strategic blunders in modern financial history. On February 26, 2022, the European Union made history. They froze approximately $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. $300 billion. Think about that number for a moment. This was unprecedented. Never before had Western nations seized the sovereign assets of a major global power. Not during the Cold War, not during any previous conflict. This was a new weapon, a financial nuclear option, and Europe pulled the trigger. For 2 long years, those assets sat frozen in European banks, locked away, inaccessible to Moscow. During that time, Europe debated endlessly, what should we do with this money? Can we legally confiscate it? Should we return it as part of a peace deal? Will there be consequences if we take it? The debates went on for months, committee after committee, legal opinion after legal opinion. Meanwhile, the world watched. Every central bank on earth was paying attention. Every finance ministry was taking notes because everyone understood this was not just about Russia. This was about setting a precedent. Then in May 2024, Europe made its decision. They would not confiscate the principal amount. That might be too legally risky, too politically explosive, but they would seize the interest earnings, approximately $3 billion per year, $15 billion accumulated so far. They would transfer this money directly to Ukraine as military aid. When I heard this decision, I knew immediately it was catastrophic. You cannot partially steal someone's money and expect no response. Europe thought they had found the perfect compromise. Keep the principle intact. Take only the profits, a perfect middle ground that balances justice with caution. But here is what they failed to understand. There is no middle ground in financial warfare. You either respect property rights or you do not. You either honor the sanctity of sovereign assets or you tear that principle apart. There is no compromise position. Europe tried to have it both ways. They wanted to punish Russia while maintaining the appearance of respecting international law. They failed at both. Let me tell you what Russia did in response and why it changes absolutely everything. Within 48 hours of the EU announcement, Moscow issued a decree. Any European company with assets inside Russia was now subject to mere retaliation. If the EU was seizing $15 billion in accumulated Russian assets and interest, Russia would seize an equivalent value in European holdings, not more, not less, exactly $15 billion. The precision was deliberate. This was not random confiscation. This was calculated symmetry. Russia was establishing a principle. You take from us, we take from you, equal measure, perfect balance, and the list of vulnerable European companies is absolutely staggering. Volkswagen has $5 billion in Russian assets. Raiffeisen Bank has $8 billion. Danone has $2 billion. So General Unilever, Shell, British Petroleum, the list goes on and on. The total European corporate exposure inside Russia exceeds $200 billion. Russia is not threatening to seize all of it. They are being surgical, strategic, targeting exactly the amount Europe took. Now, here is where the situation becomes truly interesting. European governments are panicking because their biggest corporations are screaming at them. Volkswagen cannot afford to lose $3 or $5 billion. Raiffeisen would face potential insolvency. These are not small businesses. These are massive corporations with millions of shareholders, hundreds of thousands of employees, powerful political connections that reach into every European capital. So European governments find themselves trapped. They took Russian state assets to fund Ukraine's defense, a moral decision, a righteous cause. But now their own private sector is being sacrificed to pay for that decision. And those companies are demanding their governments make a deal with Moscow. They are lobbying furiously, threatening to pull out of countries that pushed for sanctions, pressuring politicians who supported the asset seizure. The European unity that seemed so strong in February 2022 is cracking, and Russia is widening those cracks with expert precision. This is economic warfare at the highest level. But here is what makes Russia's response truly brilliant. They are not seizing assets randomly or emotionally. They are being extraordinarily selective. They are specifically targeting companies from countries that pushed hardest for asset confiscation. German companies, French companies, Austrian companies, the very nations that championed this policy are now watching their corporations pay the price. Meanwhile, companies from countries that were hesitant about sanctions initially are mysteriously being left untouched. Hungarian firms, for example, they continue operating normally inside Russia. This creates devastating political divisions within the European Union. It rewards countries that showed restraint and caution. It punishes those that were most aggressive and vocal. This is strategic genius in action. Russia is not fighting Europe as a unified bloc. They are exploiting the natural cracks and fissures, turning member states against each other, setting national interests against collective solidarity, and the strategy is working perfectly. Europe's united front is crumbling. And every day, the pressure from corporations grows stronger. Let me tell you what this means for the broader global financial system, because this crisis goes far beyond one dispute between Russia and Europe. For 75 years, the Western financial system operated on one fundamental principle. Property rights are sacred and inviolable. When you deposit money in a Western bank, when you hold assets in a Western jurisdiction, those assets belong to you. Governments might tax them, might regulate them, might require disclosure, but they cannot simply take them for political reasons. That principle died in February 2022, and it was buried permanently in May 2024. Now, every central bank on earth is asking the same question. If they did it to Russia, could they do it to us? And the answer is obviously yes. If Western nations can seize the assets of a nuclear-armed Permanent Security Council member, they can seize anyone's assets. No one is safe. I have spoken personally with central bank governors from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Every single one is conducting urgent reviews of their reserve holdings. Every single central bank is now asking how much of our national wealth is vulnerable to Western seizure, and the answer terrifies them. Most central banks hold the majority of their reserves in dollars and euros. Assets denominated in Western currencies held in Western banks, subject to Western jurisdiction. All of it potentially vulnerable if geopolitics shift. So what are these central banks doing right now? They are diversifying quietly, methodically, without public announcements. They are reducing dollar and euro holdings. They are increasing gold reserves at the fastest pace in decades. They are exploring bilateral currency arrangements with trading partners. They are building payment systems that completely bypass Western financial infrastructure. This is the real cost of the asset seizure, not the $105 billion Europe took from Russia, but the trillions of dollars in central bank reserves that will steadily flee Western jurisdictions over the next decade, because trust, once broken, cannot be restored. You cannot unring this bell. The message has been sent. Western assets are not safe. Not. Property rights are conditional. Geopolitics trumps everything. Let me give you concrete examples of what is happening right now. Saudi Arabia is actively negotiating yuan-denominated oil sales with China. The petrodollar system that has existed for 50 years is being quietly dismantled. The United Arab Emirates is building gold-backed settlement systems for international trade. India is trading with Russia using rupees. Brazil is settling trade with China in their respective national currencies. These are not experiments or pilot programs. These are fully operational systems, and they are growing every single month. More trade is happening outside the dollar system. More central banks are diversifying away from Western assets. More countries are building financial infrastructure that does not depend on New York or London. Europe thought they were punishing Russia for aggression. What they actually did was accelerate the decline of Western financial dominance. They proved to the entire world that Western assets carry political risk, that property rights are conditional based on your relationship with Washington and Brussels, that geopolitics will always trump economics when push comes to shove. And here is perhaps the cruelest irony of this entire situation. The $15 billion that Europe is seizing from Russian interest payments will not change the outcome in Ukraine. $3 billion per year in military aid is meaningful. It provides weapons and ammunition. It helps sustain Ukraine's defense, but it is not strategically decisive. Russia's military budget exceeds $100 billion annually. Europe's contribution of $3 billion per year barely moves the needle in the larger conflict. So let me be absolutely clear about what Europe has done. They have sacrificed the credibility of their entire financial system. They have undermined 75 years of property rights precedent. They have accelerated the flight of capital from Western jurisdictions, all for a tactical advantage that will not determine the war's outcome. This is strategic incompetence on a truly historic scale. Future historians will study this decision as a textbook example of how short-term moral satisfaction can produce long-term strategic catastrophe. Europe won the moral argument. They took a stand against aggression, but they may have lost the financial war that will define the next 50 years. Now, let me tell you what Russia is really achieving with this mere retaliation response. This is not just about recovering $15 billion. Russia's economy is massive. 15 billion is significant, but not existential. No, this is about establishing a completely new principle in international relations. The principle that financial weapons can be effectively countered, that asset seizures will invite immediate retaliation, that the West's financial dominance is not absolute or unchallengeable. Every country watching this crisis unfold understands the lesson being taught. If the West freezes your assets, you can freeze theirs. If they seize your property, you can seize theirs. The weapon that seemed so powerful can be turned around and pointed back. This realization destroys the West's primary non-military leverage over other nations. For decades, the threat of financial sanctions was enough to bring countries into line. Comply with our demands or we cut you off from the financial system. Obey our rules or we freeze your money. That threat only works if countries believe they have no alternative. Russia is demonstrating the alternative in real time. Fight back against financial aggression. Build parallel systems that bypass Western control. Retaliate symmetrically and without hesitation, and suddenly the threat loses its power. The weapon becomes useless. I keep thinking back to that meeting in Brussels, that officials' haunting words, "We have created a monster we cannot control." He was not talking about Russia's military response in Ukraine. He was talking about the financial precedent that Europe set. Because once you break the sacred rule that property rights are inviolable, you cannot put that genie back in the bottle. The damage is permanent. Every future international conflict will now involve asset seizures. Every dispute will escalate to financial warfare. Every country will build defensive systems against Western financial power, and Western financial centers will be the biggest losers. Think carefully about what this means for London, New York, and Frankfurt. These cities became global financial centers for one reason. They offered safety, neutral jurisdiction, rule of law, property protection. That was their entire value proposition to the world. But if the United Kingdom can freeze Russian assets, if the European Union can seize interest payments, if the United States can weaponize the entire banking system, then these cities are no longer neutral. They are weapons, and smart money does not park wealth inside a weapon. It finds safer ground elsewhere. This is why we are seeing the rapid rise of alternative financial centers. Singapore, Dubai, Hong Kong. These cities are positioning themselves as truly neutral jurisdictions. They will not seize your assets for geopolitical reasons. They will not weaponize their financial systems to support foreign policy goals. That neutrality is becoming their primary competitive advantage. and capital is already flowing in that direction. Chinese companies are moving regional headquarters to Singapore. Russian oligarchs are buying property throughout Dubai. Middle Eastern sovereign wealth is diversifying away from London. The geography of global finance is shifting dramatically. And Europe is accelerating this shift every single day. The asset seizure continues. More capital decides to leave. Not just Russian capital. Any capital that fears it might be next. Any wealth that wants true safety. Let me address the moral argument directly because I know what critics will say. Russia invaded Ukraine. Asset seizure is justified as punishment. This is about international law, humanitarian principles, standing against aggression. I am not defending Russia's actions in Ukraine, but morality and finance operate on completely different timescales. You can win the moral argument today and lose the financial war tomorrow. The West weaponized its financial system for moral reasons. For righteous purposes, Russia responded with cold strategic calculation. And in the long run, strategy always defeats morality. When India buys Russian oil, they are not endorsing the invasion. They are protecting their energy security. When Saudi Arabia sells oil in yuan, they are not rejecting Western values. They are diversifying geopolitical risk. When Brazil settles trade in reals, they are not choosing sides. They are choosing independence. Europe forced the world to choose between Western morality and national self-interest. Most countries chose self-interest, not because they are immoral nations, but because they have populations to feed and economies to run. The asset seizure sounded righteous. It felt powerful in the moment, but it was strategically idiotic because it united everyone who fears Western financial power. It gave them a common cause and shared purpose, and it accelerated the very multipolarity that the West claims to fear most. Russia's response is not just about recovering $15 billion. It is about demonstrating that financial empire is as vulnerable as military empire. That dominance has natural limits. That power inevitably invites resistance. And that the era of Western financial hegemony is ending not with submission but with retaliation. I look at what is happening and I see a pattern I have watched throughout my entire career. Empires overreach. They weaponize their greatest strengths. They assume their power is permanent and unchallengeable. And then they discover that every action creates an equal and opposite reaction. Europe thought it was punishing Russia. Instead, it has punished itself. The $15 billion seizure will be remembered not as the moment Europe stood firm, but as the moment it broke the system that made European wealth possible. And Russia's response will be studied in strategy courses for generations, as the moment a sanctioned power proved that financial warfare cuts both ways and that the empire's weapons can always be turned against itself. This is Alexander Leo Smith for Light Intel. Subscribe right now if you want more analysis like this. Comment below with your thoughts. Share this video because this story is not over. The consequences are just beginning and no one is.